This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. This is Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie Buckaroo and Bill Castaner. And Bill is making his way in here. He's recovering from his bout of the Beatles. Bill has been doing nothing but Beatles reporting for the last few days.
Beatlemania.
Beatlemania.
This is viral.
How many installments have you put up on Lansing Online News?
6. I got a few more to go, too.
You do, I know. And you watched the specials last night, some of them.
5 hours.
5 hours?
Well, 3 were on were on the internet.
Well, what were the highlights?
The ones on the web were panel discussions, and on the panels were people like Patty Boyd, who was George Harrison's girlfriend, Peter Asher of Peter and Gordon, so people like that.
You really got down in the weeds then into the.
They did. They were
Yeah.
good. And they were there. They lived it. Now, the TV special had a lot of low points.
It did, didn't it? I heard. I didn't see
Like
it, but I heard a lot.
Katy Perry singing yesterday, and
Maroon 5.
yeah, Maroon 5.
That seemed to be Twitter blew up when that happened. I was busy watching the Olympics.
There were some funny things. I was on with a rock critic on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
From Detroit News. She's pretty snarky.
Yeah.
I hope you're listening, Susan. But somebody posted on there. Now, why did Katy Perry have to wear the shower curtain from her hotel room? They were really nasty. But parts of it were fun. The two best performers were Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr almost.
That's what I heard.
In their 70s.
Amazing.
Maybe it's because they know how to sing that music.
Well, how much does it resonate, I wonder? I'm going to find out tomorrow morning with my class. I'm going to ask how many watched the Beatles reunion shows and so forth. And I suspect on the under 25 crowd may not be that great.
I think not. I think where it really picks up again, though, is the under 13 crowd.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They all wearing their Beatle wigs and.
Well, I don't think that, but yeah, I think the younger kids are picking it up, and that your class is not going to be there. I don't think you'll be lucky to have a few, really, a handful of kids that watched it.
Well, I'll find out tomorrow with the eye clickers.
But it was it was fun. It was really interesting. I certainly learned a lot more than I knew about the Beatles.
And you've been researching them for months, so that says
literally
a lot.
Months, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you also joined me last Friday at Michigan State University when the president visited, and that was quite the event. Michigan State University was delighted that Obama showed up, although you and I, because we are as snarky as anybody on Twitter, decided that we would critique the performance and that maybe there were things they could have done better.
And now the president himself did great.
He did. He's a very charming man.
Very charming, yeah.
And there was certainly enough media to cover him.
Oh my gosh. I have never been at a presidential event that's had that much media.
One of the differences I noted is that I was looking at the slips of paper where, they told you where to stand. I was, of course, standing in the spot that had no slip of paper. I just tried to fit myself in where they would let me, because I was there from Sustainable Farmer, which was way at the bottom of the list. And Al Jazeera America was there, and a lot of other new news installations were there. So I think that's part of the difference. There are so many new news startups, especially web startups. And cable startups, that I think that's part of the difference.
I do, and they came with video cameras.
They sure did.
They're shooting video, and they'd probably take a 5-minute segment at most out of that.
Oh,
I was standing between the Detroit Free Press and Detroit News photographer.
Okay.
Who ran almost the identical photo. I mean, because that's what you got. I mean, that's the only thing you could shoot. Think about it. It was because it's controlled. It's a very controlled event.
I mean, my department director said to me, "Did you get any good pictures?" And I said, "I got the same pictures that the other 55 people next to me did." Because
absolutely.
There was no variation. It was just that you owned that one and could get it up.
Yeah, there was no variation at all.
Right.
I was trying to think of something to do creative. I couldn't think of one thing because it's totally controlled.
All I did afterwards was shoot pictures of my students and the students, current and former students of MSU, and showed, because for them, a lot of them, it really is the time of their life. If you're 21 years old and a junior in college and you get to cover the president, that's a big deal.
They'll never forget it.
No.
It's a big deal for everybody, and I think everyone should remember that there's been 10 presidents or presidential candidates who went on to become president, visited since 1907, starting with Teddy Roosevelt, and it's a big deal when the president comes somewhere, I think.
So why didn't Luana Simon introduce the president?
I don't know.
And
I asked her.
And you asked her.
And I asked her,
yeah.
And she said she wanted the vice provost to do that June.
And to get the vice provost to do it, I mean, I don't think she meant it as a snub, but some people perceived it that way.
Two people next to me did. So I wasn't alone. I just think with the presidents there, probably the most important person, unless it's like a classroom or something, where then the teacher would be involved. But the president probably should have at least spoken.
I thought so too. Maybe even if only just briefly. Ben Cross, the farmer from Leland, the cherry farmer from
Very good. He
and
was, wow, he was
I
good.
know. I asked him afterwards. I said, "Are you the only Democratic farmer in the state?" I don't. They're very rare. So, and he kind of looked at me funny, and I thought, he may not even be a Democrat.
I don't think he is.
So that could well be as well.
The
Hmm.
other thing I noticed, and I'm not sure, I'm trying to find out if the presidential visit controlled this, but there were no MSU logos
I wondered
where you
about
could
that.
shoot them. There was one in the entire building, but it was hidden.
I like the part where the press got to go in through the same chute that the horses used to get into the building. I thought that was a nice touch.
there was there was a slight odor still. It was it was an unusual place to hold an event because and by no means was it ready for anything. And
No.
you had to go through two doors to get in. You had to go walk inside and then outside and then back inside.
And as a communications person of long standing and great renown, Bill knows that what you do is you make sure to get water to the people who are the press. We were standing there. They locked us in at what 12:30, and then the video doesn't start. The president doesn't arrive till about 2. So you're stuck there for a very long time.
Long time.
And it would have been nice to have had a few cookies, a couple carrots.
Right, and the other thing I thought of today is they could have, they being MSU, could have passed out their own press kit, just some fact sheets about. Well, they could have done how many presidents visited MSU.
Oh yeah.
That would have been easy to do.
Well, I'm eager to get working on my video because I may be the only person that does have pictures of the organic pigs at the student farm that the president talked about. So I am the only person prepared with that B-roll. So I'm pretty
See,
excited.
that made me hungry.
Okay.
With barbecue, I was starting to think, I've been here like 4.5 hours. It's a long time when you do that.
Well, I'd like to bring Representative Jeff Irwin from Ann Arbor into the discussion. Did you get a chance to see the president?
I did not. I got a chance to see him and shake his hand when he was in Ann Arbor last spring, but I didn't make it up to Lansing. But while you were talking about this, I was remembering back to Bill Clinton's visit to East Lansing. I was a student at East Lansing High School at the time,
Oh,
and
wow.
I remember going down to campus and walking down there with my parents and seeing President Clinton speak before he was president.
Wow.
I also remember Al Gore with John Bon Jovi out in front of LS Teco
When was
Mackerel
this?
Sky. Several years later, it must have been in 2000,
2000, I
when he
think.
was running.
I'm impressed.
Uh,
Bon Jovi was here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, they were trying to kick up Al Gore's excitement level a little bit, and I think rather than bring John Bon Jovi, they should have just let Al Gore be Al Gore.
Well, that might have been nice. In fact, that's one of the things that I always argued about. I was one of those 1,000 people that Gore trained down in Nashville.
Hmm.
Cheapskate though I am, I actually spent my own money to go down there and attend the training. And when I think about the fact, and one of the questions that I really wanted to ask him, but I didn't want to waste the time, was why didn't you talk about these things when you were campaigning? Because I think it would have energized people. I mean, I think it was the kind of issue that he needed to emphasize in that campaign. Instead, he was busy listening to, I think it was Naomi Wolf who was telling him to wear earth tones,
Mm-hmm.
that somehow that would be the answer.
Yeah,
Birkenstocks.
he played it too carefully, and he needed to talk about things he was passionate about, and the future of our environment, clean air, clean water. What are we going to do to get the nation's energy in the future, and how can we do that in ways that don't indebt us to overseas powers or pollute our air and water so bad that the next generation can't live? I mean, these are fundamental questions, and Al Gore, when he was in Congress, was a real leader on these issues, and it was something that he was and is genuinely passionate about. And so I think if he were to speak about those issues,
Oh,
he would
I
have
do.
connected better with the voters, and we might have avoided the Supreme Court deciding that election.
Life in the Balance was the book that he had brought out prior to, and I don't know why he didn't run on that. Was a perfect platform. Uh, Jeff Irwin, I see you as one of that younger generation of new politicians coming up in the Democratic Party who understand the need to appeal to the base and talk about the kinds of issues that really energize people. I mean, if we're going to move forward and have the agenda we want, we have to energize young people. And I know the young people I teach at MSU, the issues you just cited are the ones they care about. How did the party kind of drift away from that? Did they think it was safer, or I mean, is it just take a little kick every once in a while to get the politicians to talk about these issues seriously? It seems like climate change went underground for a long period of time.
Well, there's certainly a lot of politicians and people in both parties who put their finger in the air and govern by polls or however you want to put it. But I don't think of the party as being this monolithic thing. I mean, I think it's a collection of the people who are involved, and I'm just one person who's involved. And I think that talking about issues that matter to people, that's what motivates people to go vote. That's what motivates people to care about politics. And I think the central problem that we have in our communities and in our nation really is a dearth of information and discussion and dialogue about political subjects. These are community concerns that affect all of us. In Lansing, we're regularly voting on laws and budgets that affect 10 million people at once. That's important business, and it's the people's business. And it's something that I wish people were more eager to talk about around dinner tables and at coffee shops and restaurants. For some reason, all of the most exciting topics have become sort of taboo and polite conversation here in America, and I don't throw in with that. I like to talk about issues that affect our community, whether it's clean air and clean water, or equality and civil rights, or how can we have the best education system so that we can propel this future success of Michigan. I think those are the core issues for our state, and so I think it's exciting to talk about those issues.
Has the forum moved online? Because I don't see very many places where people gather anymore. I mean, years ago, the book Bowling Alone said that that level of civic engagement where people went down to the local clubs and political clubs and talked, even at the Elks and so forth, there was political discussion around the table. That sort of era is gone. Have we substituted now Twitter and Facebook and social media for talking about these things?
At least to some extent, certainly, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I regularly tell people I think it's wonderful that individual people have this channel through the internet and through social media that they can broadcast their views to others and have that dialogue on the internet. It's a huge opportunity, and it's an opportunity that we need to exploit because so many of the media sources that we depended upon in the past have fallen apart because of the business model that was supporting them. It just doesn't seem to be viable anymore. We don't have a lot of investigative reporters. We don't have a lot of people who are really digging into the details of what's going on. Which is why I appreciate the work you're doing. And I see you around town a lot, carrying your camera and interviewing people.
Freezing
Yeah, whether it's out on the Capitol during what was happening last year when they passed the law prohibiting contracts that um, require that workers pay in to support the organization that represents them in the workplace. We see you out there, and we see you doing that kind of reporting at the local level, which is really what we've been missing from some of the bigger media outlets that, because of business reasons, I think have not been investing in investigative reporting.
I keep thinking that what I'm doing is building a sort of archive and a video library for the future, because there are things that happen that I don't think many people are aware of. I have all these videos that I shot when Dave Agema a few years ago held a meeting across from the Capitol that attracted a lot of Tea Party people about the threat of Sharia law.
I remember that.
And
Yeah.
it was hilarious to me because, I mean, of all the things to worry about with so many serious problems that are really facing our country, to have wasted that kind of resource
Yeah.
on those meetings, it
I
worries
have a
me.
different view of Dave Agema. I think that he is doing an important public service. He is someone who unabashedly repeats the Republican platform in ways that is, it's unvarnished,
It
and it's
is,
it's
isn't it?
very genuine.
Yeah.
And he lays bare what so many of his colleagues in the legislature were doing along with him when he was there, to restrict the rights of people based on their sexual orientation or their nation of origin or their religion.
Right.
And so as long as the Republican Party is going to oppose marriage equality, I think they should be required to keep Dave Agema on their board, and that he should be required to make regular statements to the media and the public to advertise the brand.
Bonnie,
Go ahead.
today when I posted the story about the book that's going to be unveiled tomorrow night in Lansing by Bob Morris, his father was Ken Morris, a labor leader, but he mentioned he works around Walter Reuther quite a bit in there. And what I found online, which I had never seen, was Walter Reuther's statement to 50 years ago to the first Martin Luther King March on Washington.
Really?
Video. He was an amazing speaker. I knew that, but wow, this was good.
Wow.
And who would have thought 50 years later, finding that in an archive and putting it online?
And who'd
See,
have thought 50 years later we'd be where we are now?
Yeah.
I mean, those were people who literally put their lives on the line for those issues. And to watch so much of it drift away. I mean, speaking about standing out there freezing in the cold during all those right to work rallies at the time that that was rammed through, I stood there with a little video camera in front and listened to some great speeches by passionate people. And it seemed that they all fell on deaf ears, but at least we'll have a record of them to look back on. I keep thinking, though, that that's the wrong attitude. We shouldn't be building a time capsule. We need to be moving an agenda forward. I know one of the things that you've been outspoken on, which I think is very brave because a lot of people have shied away from this issue as well, is the issue of medical marijuana in Michigan. And roughly 60, well, I guess the 63, 66, depends on which article I read lately, percent of the people in the state voted to legalize medical marijuana in Michigan. It seems like everything that's happened since has been chipping away at some of what people thought were their perceived rights. And we have been joined by Jim Power, who is with the Cannabis Pediatric Council. Am I right?
Pediatric Cannabis Therapy.
I've got
Thanks
it
for
wrong.
having me.
Thank you. Good to have you join us. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing. Jim, you've been very involved because in that issue because of the fact that a recent court decision stripped people of what they thought they had the right to consume, things like cannabis oil and other medibles. Why is that such an important issue to you?
Well, my son was diagnosed about 2 years ago with an autoimmune disease that is called minimal change nephrotic syndrome. And in a nutshell, what happens is his immune system attacks his kidneys. It causes severe kidney dysfunction. It causes them to swell up like a balloon. And the pharmaceuticals that they use to treat him are not only extremely harsh, but we found that they didn't work. The course of treatment was a very high dose of steroids, and what happened was he was diagnosed as steroid dependent. So every time he tried to wean him off the steroids, he would relapse and the immune system would kick back up. So we tried a couple different drugs, Cellcept, which is a drug that they use in transplant patients. We did chemotherapy with Cytoxin, which is a very well-known chemotherapy agent. It's very
Potent.
Very potent. And he failed both of those therapies. And giving my son chemotherapy was one of the very most difficult decisions I ever had to make. And after that, we just kind of threw our hands up and said, we're done. We need to figure out something that'll work. So with his doctors, we tried one other pharmaceutical, which he's still on today, called Neoral. And we didn't see the result from that medication. We started him on the cannabis oil. And within a week of him being on the cannabis oil, he went back into remission, which could have been the pharmaceuticals or, it could have been a number of things. But I think what was so telling was he had a clinical appointment the following week. And my wife had decided not to give him his oil that morning because he was still getting used to the effects and didn't want to freak anybody out at the doctor's office. And when he went in, his blood pressure was sky high. One of the side effects of the steroids and the oral and whatnot is very high blood pressure, hypertension. And he shortly thereafter relapsed. Since then, he's been relapse-free. It's been 7 months. And we credit cannabis oil as a very big part of that. The frustrating part was the Carruthers decision that was handed down by the Court of Appeals about a month after he went into his long-term remission. The Court of Appeals took away our Section 4 protections for cannabis oil, which the Section 4 is protection from arrest. All the custody protections are in Section 4, so obviously that's an enormous deal to us. So we've been working with a group called the National Patients' Rights Association, and with Robin Schneider from that group. And she's been our liaison between folks like Rep. Irwin, Rep. Colleton, Rep. Colwell, and everyone else in the House that has, really stood up and stood behind us. And I think the House of Representatives really gave us just a ton of support, and we didn't expect it, to be quite honest. We were ready for a fight, and we didn't get it. And I thought that was quite encouraging. But now, as everybody is, by now, I'm sure, read, we are in for a fight. We've got a lot of work to do in the Senate, and we've got to get to it. We've got to do a lot of education. We've got to let these senators know exactly why we need this, why we need it so badly, and what it means if we don't get it. We're in the background working on that now.
Jim, I was there on the day that you testified in front of the Senate committee. I had my camera in the back, and it was one of the most wrenching testimonies I've ever heard. Your wife had your son in her arms as you testified. And Senator Randy Richardville, who is the Senate Majority Leader, this was on the Prairie Plant Bill as well. This is what we were talking about. You were trying to plead for, rather than go ahead with this sort of industrial, give a contract to this industrial cannabis manufacturer out of Canada, why aren't we working on the bills 5104, House Bill 5104, which would authorize medibles and cannabis oil, and then House Bill 4271 that would deal with the issue of dispensaries and or provisioning centers, as they're called in there. And what bothered me was that it seemed like Senator Richardville had been moved by your testimony. And he's on tape. If you go to my YouTube channel, you will see him talk about how, well, now I really understand, and thank you for telling me. I hadn't realized this. And now he said he's going to sit on these bills.
So I've got a whole lot to say about that.
I suspect you might.
That specific interaction with Senator Richardville, and as much as I was opposed to 660, and I, very much support the patient caregiver system that's in Michigan today, and certainly support 4271 and expanding that system. Senator Richardville did do something for us, and I don't think people understand that. One of the main qualms I had with 660 was the fact that it prevented underage patients from participating in the program. Senator Richardville, through his office, told me directly after that hearing that they were going to fix that. And when it went into the House, his office, along with Rep. Kowal and her team and all the co-sponsors in the House, worked to resolve that. So, I mean, I get everybody, and that particular situation, a lot of people have pointed that particular situation out to me, and I think he's kind of getting a bad rap on that, quite honestly. He did do what he said he was going to do, and he kept his word to me. I think that...
Would that change, though, really make a difference in your son's situation?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. But, I mean, as a board member of pediatric cannabis therapy, a lot of times I have to take a step back and say, is this a step forward or isn't it? And with 660, although it wouldn't have helped my son, I certainly think that it would help somebody. But I also think that it opens the door, at least, to pediatric use, whereas before, and you can hear Senator Richardville say it on the audio that he provided online, that he thinks the real issue was people believing that children shouldn't have access to cannabis.
Yes.
And the fact that everybody that was part of that bill came together and overcame that fact, it's a huge step. So that even if we are stuck with the 660 system, at least there's some option for some minor patients. It's certainly not ideal, and it's not how I would have written it, but I think it's better than it was.
Representative Irwin, you had introduced a bipartisan bill. I went down to, by the way, I still have to process the video from the town hall in Grass Lake. I apologize, but that's one of the stacks of videos I have to get to yet. You were trying to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana in the state, which would, again, also help people who were using it medically. They still seem to be running into trouble in this state. Was it things like Dr. Sanjay Gupta's program and so forth about children with seizures and how they're helped? Do you see a change coming in the House of Representatives where they are understanding more about why it's sort of silly or worse than silly, it's dangerous to keep criminalizing this drug?
I think you are seeing a change. You're seeing a change in the House of Representatives, but mainly you're seeing a change, I think, in the population. If you look at the polling numbers on the percentage of Americans or percentage of Michiganders who believe in decriminalization or legalization, that majority is growing, and it was recently established. And I think what you're seeing is more and more citizens coming around the idea that America was founded as a free country, and the idea was as long as you're not harming others, you should be able to do what you want. And that liberty and that freedom is so core to what so many of us identify as being American, conservatives and liberals, that people are coming to grips with the fact that marijuana prohibition just runs afoul of that. And I also think that people are coming to grips with the fact that it's just a giant, costly failure. I mean, state and local governments spend millions and millions and millions of dollars running people through the mill of the criminal justice system. And more and more people are coming around to the idea that that doesn't help anyone. That's not productive for society. We could put those resources into more important public safety goals. We could put those resources into education or substance abuse treatment. All of these other options are more attractive to the public than the current system we have that wastes money and destroys people.
You know, and I'm going to give my pitch that every time we talk about this, I bring up because I've been involved in the political system and I see how you elect and diselect people. But how come a political force hasn't come from that the people's will that targets individuals who, if you do not support legalization, they're not elected anymore? I mean, what's the disconnect? Why can't there become a political force with pro marijuana?
I think that there is, and I think more and more politicians are starting to change their views publicly, and we're seeing big majorities in the House for providing more safe and legal access to medical patients, and we're seeing Democrats and Republicans introduce legislation on decriminalization and talking about legalization here in Michigan. And all of that is driven by the fact that the people, as always, the people are leading, and the politicians are responding to the feelings amongst the public. The Pew Center for Public Research did a study that suggested that 78% of Americans believe that we spend more money than it's worth trying to enforce marijuana prohibition. I mean, that is a number that is practically unanimity. I mean, practically everyone agrees that this prohibition policy is a waste. It's destroying people's lives. It's emboldening and empowering criminals, putting money in their hands and giving them a cause to commit violent acts. We all know that it's a huge failure from a pragmatic standpoint, and from a philosophical standpoint, we know it's un-American. So people are really coming together around this. I think that this is a change that's coming, and as someone who watches government closely and works in it, I feel a responsibility to stand up and say what so many Americans already know.
Do you think we'll see that philosophy represented at the next general election?
2014?
Well, we'll see.
year?
We'll see.
Yes.
I don't think that we're necessarily going to see, change quite that quickly. I think change happens slowly. And I think that's what's happening right now with these medical marijuana bills that are sitting in the Senate, which are great bills and which I think will pass, but I think it'll take some time. It's going to require a little bit of patience. And I think the same is true with overall reform in the area of marijuana laws. You mentioned the decriminalization bill that I introduced, House Bill 4623. Well, that bill, which would decriminalize simple possession up to and including an ounce, is just an expansion of the policy that many of our cities already have. Ann Arbor has had a similar decriminalization policy for 30 plus years.
Right.
And I can assure you that Ann Arbor is a very nice community. Grand Rapids just passed decriminalization, very, very similar to the bill I introduced. We've got Lansing, we've got Jackson, we've got Ferndale. And I think what you're going to see in 2014 is a whole other group of local communities that are going to have activists in their communities, leaders in their communities stand up and say, you know what, marijuana prohibition isn't working for our community. Let's staunch the bleeding. Let's decriminalize at the local level. Let's stop hurting our people. Let's stop wasting money. And as that momentum builds, I think in future years we'll see that come together and coalesce into something more complete and statewide.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Representative Jeff Irwin from Ann Arbor, and also with Jim Power, who's going to give me the right name of his organization, since I seem to scramble the word order every time I get a chance.
Pediatric Cannabis Therapy.
Pediatric Cannabis Therapy, thank you. And you know what we're really talking about, too, is two large camps of entrenched interests that I think are going to be hard to move. And I think we've seen it already. I spent 9 years training police in community policing, and to be honest about it, I watched our entire movement get hijacked by the war on drugs. We were looking at non-arrest strategies for solving problems in communities, and pretty quickly it became arrest the drug dealer and do things that I read grant proposals that were in total violation of everybody's civil rights. It was stop everybody on the street, even if they're a pedestrian, if they don't have a driver's license in a neighborhood where you know there's drug dealing and there's poor people, haul them down to the station, that kind of thing.
Isn't that Bloomberg's policy?
Yeah, New York. Yeah. He read the same grant.
I had a little chat with Bill Bratton, who is the commissioner of police down there. Tickets in the Bonnie Buckaroo fan club have never sold well with Bill Bratton because I said what you were really doing is you were doing community harassment policing. You weren't doing community policing. So he's not a big fan of mine. I did watch that whole movement get hijacked by the drug war because it was so lucrative. Police got all kinds of equipment. They got all kinds of grants. I mean, I know that I worked on a project with HUD on community policing. And the idea was that, well, then you could put two police officers into public housing and you could make all these drug busts. And I kept saying, but no, we're supposed to work on the problems the community cares about, their strategies. And it very quickly turned into arrest everybody you can. So you've got the criminal justice system there worth billions of entrenched interests. And many police agencies who got hooked on their drug money, because let's face it, forfeiture dollars were huge. Even if the person is later found not guilty of whatever they were arrested for under the drug laws, the police have still been able to seize their property and sell it. And I mean, I know the DEA once brought in more money than it had in its budget. It was self-sufficient just because of forfeiture laws. So you've got those entrenched interests fighting against you. You've
Right.
also got big pharma on the other side that has prevented the kind of research that might have made it clear years ago. I mean, when I first heard, I thought, boy, it's a tough enough sell to get medical marijuana to veterans with PTSD. The idea of giving cannabis oil to kids is going to be a tough sell. But then Sanjay Gupta came out, and it seemed like everybody realizes now we've got to help these kids.
I think it's easier with kids, and even
Really?
yeah, and even with before the Dr. Gupta special, we were having quite a bit of success with pediatrics here in Michigan.
Excellent.
The thing is, people understand we're not trying to get our kids high, and that's the threat that everybody's so scared of is that these
Yeah.
kids are going to get high, and that's not our intent, and it's not what we're about. We certainly think that those high effects of the marijuana can be quite therapeutic in patients like cancer patients. We're actually working with a pediatric cancer patient here in Lansing right now, and he was very severe, and the that therapeutic calming effect is second to none according to his mom. And it's important for a lot of patients. Um, Another topic that has really been out of control and that we've been fighting against is the CBD versus THC legislation.
I wondered about that because now they're saying basically CBDs are perceived as being the good part of marijuana that doesn't
Right.
get you high but cures you. And THC is that nasty stuff that if you felt good, there's something wrong with that. We're
Yep.
Puritans. We know that's not something we want to make legal. So we want to cut down on that. But you're really saying it's the combination of
It-
both that we have to look at.
It absolutely is, and I think my son is a perfect illustration of that point. We actually, before chemotherapy, had tried a high THC oil and a high CBD oil, and neither one of them he responded to. It took a mix of the two cannabinoids,
Wow.
and that's not uncommon at all. We find that even with the very severe epilepsy patients, the Dravet syndrome kids
Yeah.
that we work with, that most of them don't respond as favorably as they should on a very high CBD strain. It takes some THC and it takes some tinkering for every single person. And what we're very concerned of with the CBD versus THC legislation in these very conservative states, especially in the south of the United States, is that once the CBD legislation is passed, that these parents will not be in a position to be able to request the other cannabinoid that they need, that being THC. We feel that the politicians in those areas feel that this is going to be the end all to the medical marijuana debate in their states. And we're very concerned that not only are these bills not covering all the patients, but that they're going to stick families in precarious situations where they're counting on this. I mean, they think this is a miracle drug, most
Right,
of them.
right.
And if it doesn't come through, they're going to be devastated. So we
First of all, it will also give a bad name to medical marijuana as being
absolutely.
ineffective, and it will mean that the parents. I mean, one of the challenges I thought with the 660 bill was that the Canadian company that their Prairie Plant Systems, which is represented, the lobbyist is Chuck Perricone, who is a former GOP Speaker of the House and who I'm sure collects a hefty fee for lobbying for them. Their reputation in Canada isn't very good. They only grew one strain of marijuana. It wasn't terribly effective medically. They grew it in these mines that were perceived as being tainted with tailings that might have arsenic in them. There was concern about contamination of the drug. And yet, because they want to industrialize this and turn this into a big pharma operation where you would then get your medical marijuana through CVS and Rite Aid and places like that, and not through caregivers, you're talking about the need to be able to tinker for individual prescriptions.
Right, and I think the hearing for 660, to be honest, every time I heard Prairie Plant Systems brought up, it made me cringe because Prairie Plant Systems is not in the bill. We know that Chuck Perricone did a whole lot of lobbying on behalf of Prairie Plant Systems to get this passed, but the infrastructure that they were setting up could be utilized by anyone really.
Okay.
And I think that it would have been more beneficial if we would have argued that exact point, Bonnie, that we need to tinker. We don't know everything about this medication. We're learning as we go. And what we're learning is that no two people are the same. And to have one size fits all, or even three sizes fits all, it's just not going to work the way it should work. And people aren't going to get the therapeutic benefit that they could get if we had a little bit more granularity in what we're able to do. And the caregiver patient system in Michigan really offers that.
It's unique. I think it reminds me of, when I get ill, a lot of times I'll look up on the internet and it'll say, try this or that herbal tea, or this or that kind of natural type of remedy, either with, add a little lemon and honey for the throat and that kind of thing. And I often have to tinker with those. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I try something else. And that's a different medical model than the sort of big pharma model where you do the large scale testing. You determine that it has X, an N effect, and therefore you can get the FDA to approve it. I think people have always relied on a kind of folk medicine that has turned out to be very beneficial for a number of conditions. This really sort of furthers that tradition.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does. And I think, I mean, we definitely want to be able to set dosing standards
Yeah.
for certain ailments. Like, I need to know that my son is getting the same amount of the cannabinoids every month because we found the ratio that works for him. We don't want to deviate from it.
Okay.
So although there's definitely, that need to be able to tinker and, just tweak things here and there, there's definitely benefit from that, the scientific side, testing the material, seeing what works for who. Right now, the way that most of our pediatric cases start is they start on a very low dose and then they work their way up. And what's been very beneficial for us is the sharing of knowledge between families, especially those with similar disorders, that they know that, hey, this is working for this family, this family, this family. So the chance of, maybe a 2 milligram per pound dose is ideal for this. And it gives someone that sanity check, but we can't eliminate that personal touch
Yeah.
that needs to be given. And when we turn the whole operation over to a pharmaceutical company, I think that's basically what we're going to do.
You had something you wanted to throw in there.
No, he
Oh,
answered
okay.
the question.
He
He
answered.
answered it.
I was going to say that Michigan's system that we passed in 2008 with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act is somewhat unique because it relies on patients and caregivers developing this relationship. And the nice part about it is it does allow a lot of variety and it allows different people to engage with it as they choose, which I think is wonderful. The limitation is that when the Supreme Court when the appeals court ruled in the Carruthers case,
Mhm.
what they did in that specific case was they said that we're going to specifically outlaw these cannabis oils and these balms and other topical treatments and basically any
Ointments,
concentration
yeah.
which are the medicines that go to the most bona fide patients and
Isn't
which
that
are the
ironic?
medicines that are needed
Yeah.
by the people who can't smoke or
Right.
don't want to smoke or maybe don't want the psychoactive effects or want something that's a little more medical. Basically, the most bona fide medical uses. The appeals court said we're going to throw those out. We're going to keep, medical marijuana intact, but we're just going to ban all the most bona fide patients. That was a huge mistake. And when Representative Kowal, my colleague, introduced House Bill 5104, which is the bill that would reinstate the ability of Michigan residents to create and take and consume these concentrates, I was really happy to co-sponsor that bill because here we have one of my Republican colleagues standing up and saying, wait a second, I looked into the details. I met families like Joe's families. I talked to some of the victims, and their stories are credible and compelling, and they need access to the most bona fide methodology of taking medical marijuana. And then the other bill that we're trying to work on in the Senate, the Provisioning Center bill, House Bill 4271, same sort of situation, right? I mean, we all know that we've had prohibition on marijuana for a long, long time. And there are some patients out there who got their medical marijuana cards, because they wanted to use it as a fig leaf for their otherwise recreational use. And there's some other patients who are the really, really sick cancer patients, those guys. Now, when one of those particularly sick people finds that they want to try medical marijuana because they think it might be better than the heavy-duty opioids that they're getting prescribed by their doctor, where are they going to go? They don't have a drug dealer. They don't have a connection in the black market.
Right.
So they have to go to a dispensary, or they have to engage a caregiver. Where do they find that caregiver? Is that caregiver supposed to start growing that medicine now? That poor person could be dead by the time that medicine is prepared.
Exactly.
What if that caregiver has a crop
later.
loss?
Yeah.
Or what if that caregiver grows the wrong strain for that patient? These are all the reasons why we need to have these provisioning centers open. Because the sickest people, the ones who don't have a connection, the ones who are the most needy and most compelling patients, they need to be able to go and get their medicine right away. They need to be able to go get it from a trusted source that is doing business in an open and regulated way, like many of these provisioning centers were trying to do before so many of our communities shut them down. So,
I was pleased at the court ruling just the other day, however. The Michigan Supreme Court said that different communities don't have the right to just shut down and try to eliminate medical marijuana from their cities. So that was a huge step forward. That helped.
We were sweating that ruling quite a bit in our circle, and I'm glad it ended the way it did.
It seems that there's still the old arguments. We lived steeped in reefer madness for all these decades. You talked about how there's still education to be done. What bothers me is that those of us who grew up in the 60s, where it seemed everybody smoked a little dope in those days, right? I mean, we thought it would be a lot sooner than this. We're already dealing now with, 50 years later, we're talking about, that's not what I would call fast education in terms of getting over reefer madness. So what is it going to take to make that last push? Part of the problem is that, I can see groups like Prairie Plant Systems. They're not named in the law, but they certainly have lobbying dollars. There's money behind large pharma, big pharmaceutical companies. There's money in certain areas. I see the medical marijuana people as a really wonderful community of well-meaning people, none of whom are vacationing in Barbados, last I know, as a result of what they're making. Many of them give away half of their drugs for free to people that they know are in need who can't afford them. How can they be a lobbying force as well? What has to happen next? What do groups like yours do to educate people?
Well, I think, honestly, in Michigan, we were just blessed to be paired up with the NPRA and
National Patient Rights Association.
Yes, and they really went to bat with us, and they taught us how to lobby. They obviously utilized their lobbying resources, and I think that teamwork. The NPRA is not a pediatric group by any stretch of the means. They're all about patient rights, and this just meshed so nicely. So a lot of times when Robin actually has these weekly calls with parents in other states trying to organize medical marijuana laws for their children. And one of the things she tells them is you need a lobbyist. Mm-hmm. And of course they all jump back and say, we can't afford that. We're parents of sick kids. We don't have that type of money. But what we're finding is that a lot of these national organizations are more than willing to pair with these parents and to help them and offer their resources to them to try and make these pushes. And I think what's going to happen is once we hit that 25 state mark, I think things are going to start changing. Things are already changing in Washington. We're seeing new videos come out with the U.S. House of Representatives just completely lambasting these drug enforcement agencies on the Capitol. Mm. And I think there's a lot more of that to come. We're seeing our children die from things like heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, and we're worried about marijuana, which, quite frankly, has never killed anybody.
Yeah. Unless a bail falls on them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I understand everybody's concerns, but there's better ways to deal with the concerns about this plant than making it a Schedule I controlled substance.
Is there a marijuana pact?
No, not really, not as far as I know. You think I'd be able to find it if there were.
They'd be,
But,
Or they
I
might
would,
find
they'd
you.
be on your,
Maybe, yeah.
but there
I'm
are
just curious.
organizations
Yeah.
out there. There's organizations like Normal. They've been
Mhm.
around for a long time. There's organizations like ASA, Americans for Safe Access. There's organizations like NPRA. There's organizations like Jim's. And those organizations are effective. And Jim gives a lot of credit to some of the professionals who've been trying to help train them and coach them. And they must have been doing a great job because from where I sit in the Judiciary Committee, where we debate these bills, I can tell you that the advocates for medical marijuana, people like Jim, patients with real stories, real people with real stories, nothing matters like that. And when you get a parent talking about their child, you get a cancer patient that sits down at that table and says, "Look, here's the bag full of pills I was taking before, and I couldn't even live my life on this insane gauntlet of drugs. And now I've switched to cannabis, and I can kiss my grandchildren, and I can, enjoy my morning toast like I couldn't before. And don't take that away from me."
Yeah.
And those are powerful stories. And I'll tell you, in 2011, there was a group of bills that were introduced that would have really diminished patients' access to medical marijuana in Michigan. And there was 4 bills, and they were really trying to tighten the screws on patients and caregivers. And it was patients and caregivers who came into Lansing into the Capitol from all over the state, and they came into that hearing room and they just gave awesome testimony, personal stories, and it was compelling. And I think it reached a lot of the legislators, and that's why you saw the types of majorities in the House when House Bill 4271 and when 5104, when those 2 bills went up, they got huge majorities in the House. Why? Because individual representatives were having conversations with real people about their experiences with medical marijuana, and legislators were realizing why medical marijuana passed in every county in Michigan, why it passed with huge majorities statewide. And I think there's a lot of people in Lansing who are scratching their heads wondering why the guy who ran the campaign against medical marijuana in 2008 is still trying to refight that battle when he's sworn to uphold the laws of our state as they're written, not as he wants them to be written.
could you be speaking about Bill Schuette by any chance?
Indirectly.
Indirectly.
See, that was the kind of the case I was trying to make. Is
Let me interrupt just a sec. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, so the FCC doesn't come after us.
if this was any other issue, there would be a PAC that would be dedicated to defeating Bill Schuette.
Right, that's probably true. Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. There are a lot of issues out there that are important to thousands of Michiganders, if not millions of Michiganders, that don't have PACs, that don't have interest groups. That's actually the problem. Is that every narrow regulated industry whose balance sheet will be affected by millions of dollars based on small decisions in the law, they're there at the table every day. But the citizens who have to breathe that pollution, they're not there. They don't have a PAC. They're not organized. I mean, there's a few groups out there like Sierra Club and Clean Water Action and League Conservation Voters, but they're not organized like industry is, and they don't have to be. They don't have to be. That's the job of the politicians to stand up and do what's right and do what's in the public interest, and that's why we have to elect good people.
I can't tell you how refreshing it is to hear that, because that's exactly what I believe, that we should be able to counteract big money with people who have the courage to stand up and say those things. It's so good to hear this out of an elected representative in our state. Jim, I understand that the people in your organization would be one issue voters. If my child were sick and I knew that there was a drug out there that would save that child and make that child feel better, I would go through anything in order to make that happen. But for many people, it's part of a mix of issues. Has it turned into a partisan issue in Michigan? Would you?
No, I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think it definitely was at one point, maybe a couple years ago. But I think the results in the House of Representatives just prove wholeheartedly that this is a bipartisan issue. And what it comes down to is trying to relate with these people. I know a lot of the parents that I talk to are very much intimidated by their politicians, by their representatives and senators, and doing things like attending hearings. And I think something that's really helped for me and helped for several other members is just realize that these are real people. And a lot of them have kids. And that's one of our hooks, quite frankly, is that most of these people have kids and they can relate with us. And when we're talking to them, it's going on in the back of their mind. And they're thinking, what if this was my child? What if this happened to me? And their attitude changes. Rep. Kowal is an excellent example. I'm not certain on how she stood on the issue prior to meeting with a couple of our families, but while they were meeting, one of the children actually had a medical event,
Mm.
and I, she was immediately just our biggest supporter, and I mean that's what it takes. We want to empathize with them, and we need them to empathize with us. And unfortunately, I don't think we have that repertoire in the Senate yet. But we're going to work on it. The one thing that people need to realize is we're not going away.
Right.
We know that this works for our children.
Yeah.
And when you have a child that's facing a lifetime disability or worse, you're not going to stop at being told no. And if they tell us no, well, that's fine. We're going to keep trying. And I think we're going to come to a point in time where this medicine is going to be available to everyone freely, and that a lot of these restrictions are going to be taken off of us. Right now, I mean, a big issue is just getting law enforcement to recognize the law we have, to get
Right.
CPS to recognize the law we have.
We have places in the state. Oakland County for a while was just arresting people right and left, even though many of those cases really, the marijuana law, the existing law should have protected them, but didn't. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the case of Steve and Maria Green that I followed quite closely. And I saw Representative Irwin there that day in front of CPS. They had their child taken away. Steve suffers the kind of epilepsy that many of we see in children. And he was a user of cannabis oil and medical marijuana in order to control his epilepsy, which was life-threatening, absolutely life-threatening. And yet, even though the medical marijuana law says that you can't use that in custody issues, they ended up with their baby taken away. And it was just a devastating situation for the family. Their baby's now been returned, but we're seeing people around the state who are losing their children as a result of this.
And I think even I spoke with Steve and Maria today, actually, and for anyone that's been following Maria's case with her ex,
Yes.
this is still being visited on this family.
Yes.
And it's heartbreaking. These two Steve and Maria are just loving parents. They provide a wonderful household for their kids. And the fact that this law specifically is supposed to protect good people like Steve and Maria
Yes.
Green, and yet we can't seem to get it right.
I've been in their house and watched. It's the happiest baby I've ever seen. Little Bree is just a delightful child, and the fact that she has a son from another marriage or an earlier marriage, and she has been having difficulty getting the court to enforce the orders that were in place.
Right, and I know it's been very frustrating for her, especially after everything else that they've gone through. These people need a break, and we need the courts to step up. We need our elected, officials in these judiciary positions across the state to step up and say, even if I don't agree with this, this is what the people voted in, and I need to respect that. And in some communities, they do a really fantastic job of it. But like you said, there's communities out there, they don't do such a great job at it, and people are still going to jail, people are still losing their kids. And unfortunately, not every one of them is going to make the 6 o'clock news like Steve and Maria Green did.
Yes.
There's several outstanding CPS cases across Michigan right now, and they're not getting that attention, and they're at a huge disadvantage from it, even though they should be able to walk into court and say, Section 4 protects me. I was within Section 4. Please dismiss my case.
I'm wondering if, put recreational marijuana aside in Colorado and Washington, are those states going to be able to make leaps in medical marijuana now that they're pretty much unfettered? I mean, they're going to be able to experiment with things you're talking about freely.
So
will that happen, do you think?
No,
okay.
I don't. I don't think that we're going to make leaps and bounds until it's been rescheduled or descheduled. And the reason I don't is, the people we need to participate in here in this are the universities.
Right.
They have the resources, they have the equipment. We need them to make advances
and
in this
government
field.
grants to support the work.
Exactly. And like Michigan State University could do full spectrum analysis of cannabis oil for us.
Right.
There's no way they would.
Right.
Because they get federal funding, and they would be in violation of federal law and would possibly lose their money.
They'd risk losing all the rest of their funding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And until that changes, I don't see us making those types of advancements.
One of the things we've seen for years, any research, as you're explaining, has been suppressed. And now that some small amounts of research are being done, we're seeing remarkable things that we never knew before. We knew that it had an effect on PTSD. We knew it gave appetite back to cancer patients. We knew that it has an impact, I know my mother, on glaucoma, those kinds of situations. But what we didn't know was that we have an epidemic also in the society of middle-aged white men committing suicide. I don't know if you're, I hate to tell you this, you all fit in that. Some of you, Bill, I don't know. I mean, I keep saying I don't know if I'm middle-aged because at that point I have to live to 140 to be middle-aged. But they're finding out that cannabis has lifts depression. I mean, we have such huge expense. We talk about the expense of the criminal justice system, which is enormous, and the correction system in particular, which is just astounding what we're spending to incarcerate people on these what are really shouldn't be crimes. But on the other hand, we have this enormously expensive medical system. Look at the kinds of mood elevating drugs, and the costs on some of these drugs are tens of thousands of dollars a year. I had a friend who was leaving, she's a researcher, she was leaving to go to Sweden and she couldn't pick up her psychotropic meds that she has to take, right? And she's bipolar, and she said, I said, well, why don't I just go get them for you? I won't worry about your insurance. That's till I found out it was $3,000 to pick up the supply of her drugs to go to Sweden with when she would be. And I thought, no, I guess they're more expensive than I thought. I mean, there's a potential here for huge medical payoffs that we don't even know about yet. Can government support that? Are we going to get to the point where the federal government will change?
I think we're quite a few years behind on that for all the reasons that Jim just mentioned. And as a result, countries in Europe and South America are the ones where the foundational research is being done, where they're doing clinical trials, and that's something we're falling behind in, and it's not a good idea. But I don't anticipate it's going to change really quickly. We've got a long history here in this country, and it's going to take, I think, a few more years at least to overcome it.
Just listening to Jim talk, I think I have a kidney disease, and it's based on an immune problem. And I started thinking,
We gotta talk.
I mean, kidneys are kidneys.
Right. Whether in little people or big people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I was thinking, maybe the treatment that I've been on 40 years or 30 years, even though it's kept me alive, might not be the best thing. There might be something simpler.
I really wonder, and I know we've had guests on this show that have talked about the connection between this and Alzheimer's and dementia.
And
I mean, and when you look at the human cost in that case as well, I mean, look at all these different possibilities that are worth a try.
Well, I think the kidney thing is amazing from the vantage point that there's two organs in your body that don't regenerate themselves. One of them is your brain, the other is your kidneys. And we all know that there's been tests done with head trauma victims where they've administered cannabis and they find that the brain tissue actually regenerates itself. And there's some theoretical work being done right now, specifically in the UK, that might prove that out for kidneys. And just the fact that you can take tissue that otherwise is unable to repair itself and even see any amount of improvement is huge, and we need to take a look at that.
Many people really did, and I agree with you. They thought that medical marijuana was a fig leaf to get us to recreational. When we look at the critical issues of medical marijuana, I can't see. It seems to me that it's just insanity to continue prohibiting that. But when we look also at the recreational issues, I'd be remiss if we didn't have in our remaining minutes a bit of a discussion about the fact that we know in Colorado they're talking about with the recreational drugs out there, $200 million a year in additional revenues out there as a result of the recreational marijuana business. Michigan could have been at the forefront of this. We were relatively early with medical marijuana. We could be following up on these things. Should we try to become a leader in understanding both the medical and recreational benefits of decriminalizing this drug?
Well, I think
legalizing,
but I think we also need to be realistic about where we are right now. Michigan passed a really a good enterprising medical marijuana law in 2008. Citizens strongly supported it. But ever since then, we've been refighting that battle over and over and over again. And it's been an incredible struggle to try to get the legislature and the courts to carry out what at least I believe was the will of the people when they voted for the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. And that is that patients and caregivers should have safe and legal access. And we don't have that in most communities across the state of Michigan. So, I really think we need to focus for the short term on trying to make that a reality. by encouraging people like Senator Randy Richardville to move and have hearings on House Bill 4271 and House Bill 5104. Those are critical for patients and to carry out the will of the people as they voted in 2008. And I think that while we're doing that work, we can keep an ear to the ground and keep our eyes peeled for what's happening out in Washington and Colorado, because the fact that they've gone first is a real opportunity for us. Sometimes it's great to be a leader, but let's be honest, taking something like marijuana prohibition that's been in place for 80 years and dismantling it, that's going to be complicated. There's going to be some messy loose ends, right? And it's great for us that we get to watch Colorado and Washington work out some of those details. And one of the ones that I think is front and center, it speaks to what you were bringing up, Bonnie. How do you tax this thing? Right?
Yeah.
We've caused such developed markets in the black market. We've created so many Al Capones, and we've created these hardened black markets. If we want people to come and engage in legitimate trade and pay their taxes and pay their fair share, how do we step that up and how do we make that rational for the market so that it works?
I want to thank Representative Irwin and I want to thank Jim Power for tonight. I'm hoping this is a conversation we come back to frequently. Thank you very much. Tune in next Monday. This is LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, buddy.
Boy, we got a lot in.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was late. My GPS took me to the Gammon building, and I'm literally outside in the freezing cold running around. Where's the science building?